My name is David Alexander Hale, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the quiet one in my family. At gatherings, I wasn't the loudest voice at the table, nor the one people turned to for advice. My father made sure of that. He always saw me as the one who wandered too far from the family's expectations, the one who didn't fit neatly into his plans. My sister, on the other hand, was his pride. She walked the path he drew for her, and that was enough to earn his approval. That Christmas, as we all sat down for dinner, the house smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon. The fireplace crackled, voices overlapped, and laughter filled the room. But beneath it all, there was that familiar undercurrent of tension. I had learned to live with it, to let it wash over me without breaking my composure. I wasn't there for validation. I was there because, despite everything, they were still my family. The clinking of silverware paused when my father cleared his throat. He had that commanding presence that demanded attention even before he spoke. His fork rested on the edge of his plate, and his eyes scanned the table like a general preparing to deliver orders. I already knew something was coming. With him, I always did. He leaned back slightly, and with a voice steady and cold, said the words that would etch themselves into the memory of everyone in that room. "David, you're not getting any inheritance. Your sister deserves it, not you." The room froze. My mother lowered her eyes. My uncles and cousins looked back and forth as if waiting for a reaction. My sister smirked, just barely, trying to hide it behind her wine glass. And me? I nodded once, quietly, and went back to cutting my food. My fork scraped the porcelain plate, echoing in the silence. No one knew what to do with my reaction. Maybe they expected me to protest, to argue, to show some kind of wounded pride. But the truth is, I stopped needing their approval years ago. I had built my life on foundations far stronger than the shifting sands of family favoritism. I didn't need his inheritance. I had something of my own, something none of them could see yet. I could feel my niece staring at me from across the table, her curiosity burning through the quiet. She was young, still unshaped by the undercurrents of envy and tradition that gripped the adults around her. In her eyes, I wasn't the disappointment my father painted me to be. I was just Uncle David. Quiet, composed, unreadable. The conversation stuttered back to life, forced laughter and whispers filling the gaps. My father looked pleased with himself, as though he had just delivered a necessary verdict. My sister basked in the glow of unspoken victory, and I chewed slowly, tasting not the food, but the irony of the moment. If only they knew. I leaned back in my chair, observing them. The people who once believed their opinions could define me. The same people who dismissed the countless nights I spent working alone when no one believed in my vision. They never asked what I had been building, what had kept me away from family dinners, why I looked exhausted during holidays. To them, I was wasting time chasing shadows on a screen. But shadows have a way of turning into storms. As the chatter picked up again, I heard my niece gasp, a sharp, unfiltered sound that cut through the noise. "Uncle David, is this you?" she whispered, her eyes wide as she held up her phone. Everyone turned toward her, and in that moment, the glow of the screen became the brightest light in the room. The screen glowed in her small hands, her voice trembling as she said it louder this time, no longer able to contain the shock. "Uncle David is on the Forbes billionaire list!" The room stilled. Forks froze midair. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. Every sound, the crackle of the fire, the hum of conversation seemed to vanish. All eyes turned to me, then to her phone, then back to me again, as if they couldn't quite trust their senses. My father's brow furrowed. He leaned forward, squinting as though the letters might rearrange themselves into something else. My sister set down her glass too quickly, the stem clinking against the table. A flush of disbelief crossed her face, her smirk replaced by a tight line. "Show me that," my father demanded, his voice sharper than before. My niece, hesitant, passed the phone down the table. He held it up close, his hands tightening around the edges as he read. And there it was, in bold, undeniable print. David Alexander Hale, net worth $3.2 billion, founder and CEO of Innovis AI. Silence expanded, pressing against the walls, heavier than any words. My uncle coughed into his napkin. My mother's eyes glistened, torn between pride and the fear of showing it in front of my father. And me? I didn't move. I simply sat there, breathing steadily, the same way I had when he cut me out minutes earlier. The difference now was the weight of the truth hanging between us. My father set the phone down with a thud, his jaw working but no words coming. He had built his identity around control, around deciding who was worthy, who would carry the family's name forward. And in that moment, that control slipped through his fingers. You never said," my sister stammered, her voice cracking. "You never told us." I glanced at her, then back to my plate. "You never asked." The words were simple, almost soft, but they hit harder than any raised voice could. The table shifted uncomfortably. Some of my cousins exchanged glances, their eyes flicking with something new. Not pity, not dismissal. Respect. Maybe even envy. My niece looked at me differently too. To her, I wasn't just the quiet uncle anymore. I was someone the world noticed, even if my family hadn't. I remembered those years, the countless nights lit by the blue glow of a computer screen, coffee-stained notebooks filled with algorithms and dreams, the skepticism of colleagues who told me no company would ever trust generative AI to handle their content, their strategies, their communication. I remembered maxing out credit cards, eating instant noodles for weeks, betting everything on an idea no one else believed in. And yet, there it was. Innovis AI, the company I built when everyone said I was wasting my life. Now powering the campaigns of Fortune 500 companies, running personalized marketing strategies, creating reports and solutions faster than entire teams once could. The fire cracked again, pulling me back to the present. My father finally spoke, his voice low, stripped of certainty. "Is it true?" I met his eyes, calm and steady. "Yes, it's true." He leaned back in his chair, his face a storm of disbelief and something else, something I had never seen in him before. Not anger, not pride, but fear. The kind a man feels when the world has shifted beyond his grasp and he realizes too late he no longer holds the reins. I picked up my glass of water, took a sip, and let the silence linger. Because sometimes silence says more than words ever could. As I sat there, watching the uneasy silence wrap itself around the table, memories surfaced uninvited. Not as sharp stabs of the past, but as shadows and echoes, reminders of the path that brought me here. I could still remember the night I told my father what I was working on. He stood in the doorway of my apartment, shaking his head at the cables, the screens, the stacks of papers covered in code. "This isn't real work, David," he said. "You're wasting your time. Real men build with their hands, not with nonsense on a screen." His words stayed with me, not as guidance, but as fuel. Every time someone doubted me, every time they smirked at my exhaustion, every time I was left out of conversations because David is chasing his little project, I went back to the screen, to the algorithms that only I believed could become something. In those early days, Innovis wasn't a company. It was me, a secondhand laptop and an obsession. I worked nights while holding down temp jobs during the day, writing code in coffee shops that stayed open past midnight. My sister once stopped by unexpectedly, looked at the clutter of my place and laughed. "Still playing inventor? You know you're not going to change the world from here, right?" I didn't answer her then. I just kept building. The first prototype I showed to anyone crashed 3 times during the demo. I walked out of that meeting humiliated, but not defeated. I went back to the code, rewrote it line by line, until the system not only worked, it impressed. When the first small business signed on, paying me barely enough to cover rent, it felt like a crack in a dam about to burst. Still, no one in my family asked how I was doing, what I was building, why I disappeared for weeks at a time. To them, I was failing quietly. To me, I was laying foundations. I thought about those nights now, sitting at this table. Nights when I couldn't afford heating in my apartment, when I skipped meals so I could pay for servers to run tests. Nights when the city outside was asleep, but I was still awake, teaching a machine how to write, how to respond, how to adapt. Generative AI wasn't a buzzword then. It was an idea most people dismissed, too strange, too risky. But I saw what it could become. I saw a future where companies wouldn't hire hundreds to manage communications, where AI could create, respond, adapt in ways faster than any human team. Years later, when corporations finally came knocking, I was ready. I had weathered the ridicule, the doubt, the long silence of being overlooked. What looked to them like an overnight success had been built on a decade of unseen struggle. Back at the table, my sister's voice broke through my thoughts. "So, all those years you missed family dinners, skipped birthdays, this is what you were doing?" I looked at her, calm, steady. Yes, this is what I was doing. She didn't know how to respond. None of them did. Because behind their dismissal, their laughter, their judgment, I had been writing a story they could never erase. And now it was there, in black and white, printed for the world to see. My father shifted in his chair, clearing his throat as though trying to regain his composure. But the weight had shifted. For the first time, he wasn't the center of authority at this table. I was. And I didn't need to raise my voice to claim it. The fire popped again, a log collapsing inward, scattering sparks up the chimney. Around the table, no one touched their food anymore. They were too busy trying to piece together the version of me they thought they knew, with the truth that now stared them in the face. I let their silence linger, and my mind drifted again, this time to the moment everything shifted. Innovis had been a skeleton crew, barely 3 of us working out of a cramped office above a laundromat. The air smelled of detergent and steam, the floors creaked, and when it rained, we kept buckets in the corners to catch the leaks. But in that cluttered space, something extraordinary was taking shape. We had built an engine that could do what no one believed possible: generate content tailored to a company's voice, its brand, its audience, at scale. Emails, reports, ad campaigns, even customer support dialogues. Not generic, not clumsy. Sharp, convincing, human. When I pitched it to bigger firms, most executives smiled politely and walked away. But there was one, a mid-sized marketing agency on the verge of collapse, who gave us a chance. They had nothing to lose. Within weeks of using our system, their clients saw engagement soar. Campaigns that once took entire teams days to produce were now rolling out in minutes. Word spread fast. Suddenly, companies that wouldn't even return my calls months earlier were begging for meetings. What started as desperation from one agency became validation across an industry. But growth came at a price. I had to decide, stay small and safe,
or scale so fast I risked everything. I chose the latter. I poured every cent we earned back into servers, engineers, and research. I slept on the office couch, surviving on vending machine snacks and coffee so strong it burned my throat. There were nights I wondered if I'd pushed too far, if I was about to lose it all. Then came the contract. A Fortune 500 company signed with Innovis. The day the papers were inked, I knew the dam had broken. Investors lined up, users flooded in, and the world finally realized what I had been fighting for all along. I remembered walking out of that office building with the contract in hand, the city lights glittering like stars around me. No parade, no applause, just me, smiling in the quiet, knowing my life had changed forever. And yet through all of it, I never called home to brag. I never asked for recognition. What would have been the point? They had written me off long ago. I let them, because sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon of all. I came back to the present as my father shifted in his chair again, his voice rough. "You built all that without us even knowing?" I set my fork down gently, my tone calm. "Yes, without you knowing, without you asking, without you believing." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. My sister looked pale, her eyes darting toward the phone again as if the words might vanish if she just stared long enough. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the outsider at this table. I felt like the storm they never saw coming.
The tension in the room thickened until it was almost tangible, like the air itself had turned heavy. My father kept his eyes fixed on his plate, though I could see his mind working furiously behind the furrow of his brow. For a man who prided himself on control, this was the one thing he hadn't accounted for: his quiet son, the one he'd dismissed so easily, sitting at his table with a fortune larger than anything he could ever have imagined. My sister broke the silence first. Her voice was sharp, almost desperate. "So what now, David? You think this makes you better than us? That money suddenly erases everything?" I didn't look at her right away. I let the words hang in the air, heavy with the resentment she couldn't hide. Then I finally met her gaze, calm and steady. "It doesn't erase anything. It just proves I never needed what you thought I did." Her cheeks flushed, and she turned away, pretending to adjust her napkin. But I caught the tremor in her hands. Envy is loud, even when disguised as indignation. Across the table, my mother's eyes softened. For years, she had stayed quiet, choosing to keep peace rather than confront the harsh words my father often threw my way. Now, though, she looked at me differently, with something closer to pride, though muted, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to show it. My niece, still clutching her phone, stared at me with wide-eyed wonder. "Uncle David, you built all of that? Just on your own?" I gave her a small smile. "Not on my own. I had a team eventually, but in the beginning, yes, it was just me." Her expression was pure awe, a reminder that sometimes the youngest see more clearly than the rest. My father finally spoke, his voice low, almost hoarse. "Why didn't you tell us? All these years, all this time?" I leaned forward slightly, folding my hands on the table. "Because it wasn't about telling you. It was about building it. And if I had waited for your approval, I'd still be waiting." His eyes flickered, anger, shame, something else I couldn't name. For the first time, he looked smaller to me, not because he had changed, but because I finally saw the truth. His authority had always been an illusion, built on my willingness to accept it. The room sat in silence again, but it wasn't the silence of dismissal this time. It was the silence of recognition. My uncles glanced at each other, uncomfortable. My cousins shifted in their chairs, suddenly looking at me with the kind of respect I had never known from them. I didn't need their admiration, but watching the shift unfold was its own quiet vindication. I picked up my glass and took another sip of water, letting them sit with the weight of the truth. For once, I wasn't the one on the outside. I wasn't the disappointment, the failure, the one destined to live in someone else's shadow. And the best part? I hadn't had to raise my voice, hadn't had to argue or defend myself. The facts spoke louder than anything I could have said. As the fire crackled and the Christmas lights flickered softly in the background, I realized something. They were seeing me clearly for the first time. Not the version my father painted, not the caricature my sister sneered at. Just me, David Alexander Hale. And there was no going back from that.
My father's hand tightened around his glass, knuckles pale, as if he were holding on to the last shred of authority he still believed he had. For a moment, I thought he might lash out again, raise his voice the way he always did when he felt cornered. But instead, he surprised me. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time in my life, he looked tired. "I gave everything to this family," he muttered, staring down at the table. "Worked my whole life to build something worth passing on. And now, what does it mean if my own son didn't need it?" The words weren't directed at me, not really. They were spoken into the air, a man grappling with the sudden collapse of the story he had always told himself. My sister shifted uncomfortably, as if she didn't want to hear it. My uncles avoided his eyes. I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to tell him that what he built had value, that it wasn't meaningless just because I found my own path. But another part of me knew he wasn't asking for reassurance. He was facing something bigger than me, the loss of control. My mother placed her hand gently over his, her voice soft but steady. "It means you raised a son who didn't give up. Isn't that worth something?" Her words startled him. He looked at her as though she had betrayed the unspoken rule of silence, the one that always kept her in his shadow. But she didn't flinch. For once, she let her pride in me show, even if only in a whisper. I met her eyes and gave a small nod. It was the acknowledgement we had both been waiting for, though neither of us had said it out loud before. My father exhaled slowly, his chest rising and falling with the weight of it all. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, as if trying to reconcile the son he thought he knew with the man sitting across from him. His voice cracked, almost fragile. "Why didn't you tell me, David? Why didn't you let me see?" I held his gaze. "Because you never wanted to see. You wanted me to fit into your plan, and I couldn't, so I made my own." The words landed like stones, not cruel, not sharp, but undeniable. He closed his eyes for a moment, as though bracing against the truth. Around us, the room stayed quiet. My cousins sat stiffly, as if afraid to move. My sister tapped her fingers against the table, restless, her earlier confidence gone. And me? I didn't gloat. I didn't lean back with smug satisfaction. I simply sat in the quiet, letting the moment settle. Because this wasn't about revenge or humiliation, it was about balance being restored. For the first time, I wasn't being forced into silence. For the first time, my existence was undeniable. I thought of all the nights I had been invisible in this family, the years I had been dismissed, the countless times my father's words had cut deep. And now, without me raising my voice, without me demanding recognition, the truth stood tall in the center of the room. I didn't need to win. I had already won long before this night.
My sister's chair scraped against the floor as she shifted sharply, unable to contain herself any longer. Her voice cut through the room like glass. "This is insane! All these years you sat there, saying nothing, acting like some kind of martyr, while the rest of us thought you were wasting your life. And now what? You expect us to just bow down to you because you've got money?" Her words were laced with bitterness, but underneath it I heard something else. Fear. Fear that the balance of power she had always enjoyed as the favored child had been shattered in a single evening. I kept my tone even. "I don't expect anything from you. I never did." She scoffed, shaking her head, her eyes flashing. "You think this makes you special? You hid everything, David. If you were really proud of what you built, you would have shared it with your family." I leaned forward slightly, my gaze steady. "I didn't hide it. You just never looked. Every time I tried to talk about what I was working on, you laughed. You all did. So I stopped trying." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. My sister pressed her lips together, but she had no answer. The truth was too simple, too undeniable. One of my cousins, usually quick to joke, cleared his throat and muttered, "Guess the quiet one wasn't so quiet after all." A few nervous laughs followed, though they died quickly under my father's glare. My mother's hand remained on the table, close to mine, a silent show of support she hadn't dared before. My niece still stared at me like I was someone she had just met for the first time, someone worth listening to. My sister's voice broke again, this time weaker. "It's not fair. You were never supposed to be the one—" She trailed off, realizing too late that she had spoken aloud the very thought that poisoned her heart. I didn't gloat. I didn't press. I simply let the weight of her words settle over the room. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? In their eyes, I was never supposed to be the one. But I was. I let my eyes wander across the table, meeting each gaze in turn. The uncle who once told me I'd never make a living typing on a keyboard. The cousins who rolled their eyes when I missed family barbecues to work. The father who told me inheritance was for those who deserved it. And the sister who believed she had already won a race I wasn't even running. I didn't need to say it out loud. They all saw it now. The fire cracked again. The only sound breaking the tension, my sister leaned back in her chair, defeated, her earlier bravado gone. She looked smaller, diminished, the glow of favoritism stripped away. And me? I sat there in the same calm silence that had carried me through years of being underestimated. Except now, silence no longer felt like exile. It felt like power. The candles on the table had burned low, their flames flickering in the draft that slipped through the old windows. Plates of food sat untouched, the turkey growing cold, the cranberry sauce congealing at the edges. But no one cared. The dinner had ended the moment my niece's voice cut through the air. Everything after was just aftermath. My father sat rigid in his chair, his hands folded tightly, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the walls of the house. My sister had gone quiet too, her earlier fury now replaced by something closer to resignation. My mother remained still beside him, though every so often her eyes flicked toward me, and in them I saw a light I had waited my whole life to see. Pride, quiet and unspoken, but real. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need anyone to admit they were wrong. The silence was enough. It was the silence of a family realizing they had never really seen me, never really known me, and now it was too late to pretend otherwise. I thought about the word inheritance. For years, it had been dangled like a prize, a measure of worth determined by someone else's hand. Tonight, I finally understood how hollow it was. Inheritance isn't what someone leaves for you. It's what you build when no one believes in you. And mine was already carved into the world, far beyond this table. I stood slowly, setting my napkin beside my plate. Chairs creaked as eyes followed me. I didn't make a speech, didn't offer comfort, didn't throw accusations. I simply straightened my jacket and gave a nod. Thank you for dinner. And with that, I walked toward the door. The house was still draped in garlands and golden lights, the faint sound of carols playing in the background. But behind me, the silence lingered, heavy, irreversible, final. Outside, the winter air was sharp, filling my lungs as I stepped into the night. Snowflakes drifted under the glow of the street lamps, and for the first time in years, I felt lighter. Not because I had proven anything to them, but because I no longer needed to. I wasn't the forgotten son anymore. I wasn't the disappointment. I was David Alexander Hale, and my story was already written in places they could never touch.